an elderly black man, just trying to get home. But today, that would be his last walk. The police didn't just see a man, they saw a target. They didn't know who he was, but soon, they would. And what happened next? It shook the very core of this city. Before we continue, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments, and make sure to like and subscribe if you believe in justice for all. This is the story of Major Cole Benson, Delta Force, and how one man took down a broken system. The day started like any other for Sergeant Michael Carter. He had just returned from a peacekeeping mission overseas and was eager to reunite with his family. The familiar hum of the airport, the rustling of suitcase wheels, and the distant echoes of travelers were all he needed to calm his mind. He was home. But as he walked through the busy terminal, something felt off. The air seemed heavier. His senses, honed by years of military service, were alert. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. As he approached the security checkpoint, 2 officers stood nearby. They were staring at him. At first he assumed it was just another random glance, perhaps curiosity, or maybe they recognized his military uniform. But the looks lingered, sharp and suspicious. Michael had been in situations before where his skin color seemed to invite hostility, but he had learned to ignore it. Not today, though. Today something was different. "Excuse me, sir." A voice interrupted his thoughts. Michael turned to face one of the officers, a young white man with a rigid stance and a scowl on his face. His badge read, "Officer Daniels." "Yes," Michael replied, his voice steady. "We need to ask you a few questions," Daniels said, his hand moving subtly to his belt. Michael felt the familiar knot tighten in his stomach. "I don't think there's anything I've done to raise suspicion," he replied, keeping his tone even. "I'm just trying to get home." Daniels didn't respond right away. He glanced at his partner, Officer Harris, who was now standing by, watching intently. There was no smile, no attempt to be polite, just suspicion in their eyes. Harris, a taller man with a squared jaw, was already walking closer. "Please step aside," Officer Daniels demanded, pointing to the side of the terminal. Michael's heart began to race, but he knew the drill. He had been a soldier long enough to know when things were escalating, even if they had no reason to. But still, there was something in the air. Something felt wrong. "Why are you asking me to step aside?" Michael asked, his voice growing firmer. "We need to check your identification and confirm your travel details," Officer Harris said coldly. His voice lacked the politeness Michael was accustomed to. Harris didn't move to offer an explanation, nor did he make an attempt to build rapport. Michael felt a surge of frustration. He was just a man trying to return home from a mission. His uniform was spotless, and his military ID was ready in his wallet, but none of that seemed to matter. "Is this really necessary?" Michael asked, his voice calm but with an edge. "I've got nothing to hide. I'm just a soldier." Officer Daniels ignored his words and began to wave for a couple more officers to approach. "We'll need to conduct a full inspection, sir. Please cooperate." The words "full inspection" hit Michael hard. It was no longer about checking his ID. It was about something else. His gut told him that he was being singled out. There were too many red flags. The young officer's aggressive stance, the side glances between them. It wasn't just about protocol anymore. It was about power, control, and an unspoken bias. Michael clenched his fists, but his training kept him calm. He had dealt with adversaries in much worse situations. He had faced enemy lines, insurgents, and even life-or-death decisions. But nothing ever felt like this. Nothing ever felt this personal. "Do you know who I am?" Michael asked, his voice low and steady. "I'm not some random person you can harass. I'm a United States Army sergeant." Officer Harris shot him a dismissive look. "Your rank doesn't matter here." At that moment, Michael knew something was wrong. The blatant disrespect, the disregard for his uniform. It was a stark reminder of the prejudices that existed in places where they shouldn't. And in a moment of clarity, Michael realized that this wasn't just about airport security. This was about something deeper, something rooted in the very system that was supposed to protect him. Before Michael could respond, Daniel stepped forward, trying to handcuff him. The other officers were closing in, their hands hovering over their holsters. But just as the cuffs clicked, there was a sound, a soft growl. The officers froze. From the corner of the terminal, 2 large German shepherds appeared, their eyes glowing with precision and alertness. The dogs walked with confidence, their bodies bristling with readiness. They were military trained, Layla's dogs. Michael's sister, the woman he had fought to protect, the woman he had trained them to defend. "Step away from him," Layla's voice rang out from the crowd. She stepped forward, her voice carrying authority that cut through the tension like a knife. She was here, and the game was about to change. The officers, shocked by the sudden appearance of the dogs, took a step back. They had never seen anything like it. The dogs sat in perfect synchronization, their eyes locked onto the officers, ready for any signal from Layla. "Do you know who you're dealing with?" Layla asked, her voice icy. "You have no right to lay a hand on my brother." The dogs growled once more, louder now. The sound sent a chill down the officers' spines. The tension in the airport terminal was unbearable. The eyes of every passerby turned toward the scene unfolding. 2 officers frozen in place, and a group of people gathered, watching with wide-eyed anticipation. Laysola's presence had shifted the power dynamics completely. They had expected to intimidate her brother, but now the tables had turned. Laysola stood tall and firm, her military training evident in her posture. She was a woman who knew exactly how to handle herself, and she wasn't about to let these officers trample on her brother's rights or anyone else's. "Take your hands off him," Laysola ordered, her voice sharp like a blade. She stood between the officers and her brother, the dogs by her side, their bodies rigid and alert, waiting for her next command. They were her protection, and their training was beyond anything the officers could have imagined. Officer Daniels, now visibly shaken, took a step back. He had been used to throwing his weight around, to bullying civilians with impunity, but this was different. The power had shifted, and now he felt the full weight of his actions. His partner, Officer Harris, was equally stunned, unsure of how to proceed. He had never encountered anything like this before. "We're just doing our job," Harris stammered, but the words were weak. He knew they had crossed a line. They had no real justification for what they had done, and now they were caught in the middle of something much bigger than they had anticipated. Layla's eyes locked onto the officers, her expression unreadable but fierce. "You don't get to play the just following orders card here. You targeted my brother because of his skin, and now you're going to pay for it." She stepped closer to Officer Daniels, and her dogs growled in unison, a low, threatening sound that made both officers freeze. Their fear was palpable. Layla had control over the situation, and they both knew it. The dogs' military training wasn't just about physical intimidation. It was a psychological weapon. The officers' nervous glances were all the evidence Layla needed. "I suggest you back off," Layla added coldly, her eyes unwavering. "And don't make the mistake of underestimating me again." With the officers now hesitating, Layla turned to her brother, Michael. He had been silent through it all, but the fire in his eyes told the story. He had been a soldier for years, and seeing his sister, someone he trusted, step in like this, taking control, filled him with a deep sense of pride. "Are you okay?" Layla asked softly, her gaze softening as she looked at him. Michael nodded slowly, still processing the shock of what had just happened. He had faced countless threats before, but this was different. These weren't enemy combatants. These were supposed to be the people who swore to protect him, and yet they had targeted him simply because of the color of his skin. "I'm good," Michael replied, his voice steady. "Thanks to you." Layla smiled briefly, but it didn't reach her eyes. She wasn't smiling out of joy. She was smiling because she knew this wasn't over. The fight had just begun. At that moment, the sound of distant sirens cut through the air. Layla looked up, narrowing her eyes. The cavalry had arrived. Federal agents, armed and ready, were moving toward them, led by none other than Agent Ramirez, someone Layla had worked with before. Ramirez wasn't just any agent. She was known for handling sensitive cases involving law enforcement corruption, and Layla had come to trust her judgment. But this was a bigger issue than either of them had expected. "Layla, we've got this," Ramirez called out, signaling for her team to take control of the officers. The federal agents moved quickly, surrounding the 2 cops, their hands going to their cuffs as they arrested the officers without a word. "Thank you," Michael said quietly, his eyes following the agents as they secured the scene. He was still shaken, but there was a glimmer of relief in his expression. He knew this wasn't just about him. It was about something much bigger, something that needed to be brought into the light. Layla gave a small nod in response, her eyes scanning the crowd that had gathered. There were still people watching, still recording. This wasn't just a personal victory. It was a message that no one would be able to ignore. "Get the footage out," Layla ordered. Ramirez immediately moved to her phone and began uploading the video of the incident to a secure channel. The world needed to see what had happened. The world needed to know how these officers had abused their power. As Layla turned back to face her brother, her expression hardened. This wasn't over. It wasn't just about what had happened to him. It was about a system that needed to be dismantled, and Layla was going to make sure she was part of the revolution that brought change. The police station was a hive of activity. The sound of keys clinking against metal, the low murmur of voices, and the occasional slam of a door echoed through the building as officers and federal agents worked tirelessly to sort through the mess left behind. Layla's hands were still shaking from the adrenaline, but she kept her focus. This was only the beginning. They had taken the first step in holding the corrupt officers accountable, but there was much more to do. She stood in front of the holding cells, watching the officers who had been involved in her brother's attack now cuffed and locked away behind bars. They had been stripped of their badges, their arrogance shattered. But the truth was, it was only a matter of time before the full scale of their crimes came to light. Agent Ramirez approached, her expression grim but determined. "We've got the footage, Layla. The world will see what happened." Layla nodded, her thoughts still lingering on the scene outside the terminal. How quickly the situation had escalated, how they had tried to break her brother, but they hadn't succeeded, not even close. "I want them charged with everything," Layla said, her voice low but filled with authority. "And I want it public. I want every single person who watched this happen to know exactly what these officers did." Ramirez's eyes flickered with respect. "But there was something else there, something darker. We're going to make sure they don't get away with it, but we're going to need more than just the footage. We need witnesses, we need hard evidence, and we need to build a case that's bulletproof." Layla glanced over at her brother, who had taken a seat on one of the benches, his face thoughtful. His eyes still bore the weight of what had happened, but there was something else behind them now, a fire, a determination that mirrored Layla's own. He wasn't just a soldier, he was a man on a mission. The sound of a door opening caught their attention. It was one of the detectives, a tall man with a sharp jawline and a badge that glinted under the fluorescent lights. "Layla, Ramirez, we've got some updates for you." Layla turned to him, ready for whatever came next. "We've dug into the two officers you had problems with," the detective continued. "Daniels and Harris, they've got a history. Corruption, excessive force, racial profiling. You're not the first one to raise concerns about their behavior. We've got paperwork, reports, and even more witnesses coming forward." Layla felt a flicker of satisfaction. This wasn't just about her brother. This was about everyone who had suffered at the hands of officers like Daniels and Harris. They weren't just outliers in a broken system. They were the product of a deeply entrenched problem. And Layla was ready to tear that system apart. "Let's move on this," Layla said, her voice unwavering. "We've got the evidence. Let's start making arrests." The detective nodded, his eyes burning with the same sense of justice. "We'll have a task force put together by tomorrow morning. We're going to bring this to the public. We're going to make sure this doesn't get swept under the rug." Layla's thoughts went back to the moment when the officers had surrounded her brother, when they had tried to arrest him, to silence him. But now, they were the ones who would be silenced. It was time to put an end to this, and to make sure no one else suffered the same fate. "I'll be ready," she said, standing tall. "We're not backing down." She turned to look at her brother again, and he gave her a nod of acknowledgement. He was ready too, and together, they would take on the fight. They would bring justice to their father, to their community, and to everyone who had been hurt by the very people meant to protect them. But as Layla stepped out of the holding area and into the bustling station, she felt the weight of what was still ahead of them. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. The street protests continued to grow, fueled by the footage that had gone viral. Layla had become a symbol, not just for her brother, but for the entire movement that was fighting against systemic injustice. She didn't want to be a symbol, though. She just wanted to see justice served. And justice was a long road, one that required patience and persistence. As she walked out of the police station and into the cold night air, she realized just how deep this fight would go. But it didn't matter. She wasn't alone anymore. She had her brother by her side, and together they would fight until the very end. The next few days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and growing tensions. Layla and Michael's fight had sparked something bigger than they had anticipated. As news outlets ran the footage from the airport incident, the country watched in shock and outrage. It wasn't just about the two officers anymore. It was about an entire system of injustice that had gone unchecked for far too long. Layla sat in her apartment, her phone buzzing constantly with notifications, news reports, social media reactions, and messages of support. But there were also threats, anonymous accounts that called her a troublemaker, a radical. The same tired rhetoric meant to silence voices like hers. She didn't care. The voices in support were louder, and she had one thing on her mind: justice. She couldn't let these people continue to tarnish the badge, to tarnish the memory of her father, or anyone else who had suffered at their hands. She was about to head out to meet with Agent Ramirez and the rest of the federal team, when her phone rang. Michael's name flashed across the screen. "Hey Mike, what's up?" "Layla, you need to see this," Michael said, his voice tense. "I just got a call from one of the informants. They've got intel on the officers involved. They've been making deals with the gang we've been tracking, and it gets worse. Layla's heart skipped. What do you mean, worse? They were planning to sabotage the investigation. They've got connections higher up, and I think the department's been covering for them for years, Michael said, his words quick and sharp. We've been right under their nose the whole time, Layla. But now it's time to finish it. Layla sat up straighter. This was the kind of news that would change everything. This was bigger than just the two officers. This was a network of corruption that reached into the heart of the department. Where are we meeting, she asked. Head to the warehouse on 7th and Roosevelt. I've got some people inside who can help us. They're ready to move. Layla didn't hesitate. She grabbed her jacket, called Agent Ramirez, and told her where they were headed. The time for waiting was over. It was time to expose everything. As she pulled up to the warehouse, her eyes scanned the area. The place was abandoned, hidden from the usual hustle of the city. It wasn't just an old warehouse. It was a hub, a place where deals were made, where information was exchanged, and where power had been traded for too long. Layla wasn't going to let them hide behind their power anymore. She met Michael and a few trusted allies in the dimly lit space. The tension was thick, but there was a sense of resolve in the room. They were ready to take down the corrupt system that had caused so much damage. All right, Layla said, standing in front of the group. We know the officers involved, and we've got the evidence, but we're not just taking them down. We're going after the whole damn network. This ends tonight. The group nodded. Each person had their role, and they knew the risks, but they also knew the stakes were too high. The fight for justice couldn't be postponed any longer. Let's go, Layla said, her voice sharp with authority. Time to take the fight to them. As they moved toward the door, Layla felt the weight of her decisions. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about a future where her children and their children wouldn't have to fear the very people meant to protect them. It was about something bigger than any of them, a fight that would echo through generations. Layla and her team moved quickly through the shadows of the warehouse, their footsteps muffled against the cold concrete floor. The air was thick with anticipation. Each step felt like it might be their last one wrong move, and the entire operation could fall apart. But Layla didn't flinch. She couldn't afford to. The door to the back office creaked open, revealing a group of high-ranking officers huddled around a large wooden table, their conversations too quiet to hear. Layla motioned for her team to spread out, taking position around the room. She knew the moment had arrived. She had been planning for this day for weeks, and now it was time to bring everything to light. Get ready, she whispered to her brother Michael, who stood by her side, his face determined. This is it, the end of their reign. Michael nodded, his hand gripping the file of evidence they had gathered over the past several weeks. The corrupt officers, Daniels, Harris and their accomplices had been using their position to push their own agenda, but today they would finally pay for their crimes. Layla signaled for Agent Ramirez to begin setting up the cameras. The evidence would speak for itself. The corruption was vast, far beyond the two officers who had attacked her brother. The gang, the bribes, the cover-ups, it all led to this warehouse, and it all needed to be exposed. With the final pieces in place, Layla walked into the room, her presence commanding and undeniable. The officers around the table froze, their eyes widening as they saw her. They had expected her to be silent, to back down, but now they understood the truth. This wasn't just a woman. This was a force of nature. What the hell is this? One of the officers growled, his hand twitching toward his holster. But he didn't draw his weapon. Not yet. You've been living a lie, Layla said, her voice ice cold. This ends now. She motioned for Michael to step forward, and with one swift motion, he threw the file onto the table. The contents spilled out, detailed reports, photographs and recordings of the illegal activities that had been happening under their noses. The officers around the table went pale as they realized the magnitude of what they were looking at. The lead officer, Daniels, finally spoke up, his voice shaking. You don't know what you're doing, Layla. You're putting us all in danger. No, Layla replied, stepping forward. You put yourselves in danger when you chose to act like criminals. You had a choice. She picked up the file and tossed it onto the table in front of them. Now you will answer for it. The room fell silent. No one dared to speak. The truth was laid out in front of them, and there was no escaping it. The corruption was undeniable. Layla stood tall, her military dog still at her side, watching every move. She had faced down far greater challenges before. But this was personal. You can't hide anymore, Layla said quietly. This is over. As the federal agents stormed in, arresting the officers one by one, the weight of the moment hit Layla. They had won, but the battle wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. It was about making sure that no one else would be treated like they were less than human. It was about making sure that the system would never again turn a blind eye. Outside, the protest continued, louder than ever. The crowd had grown, chanting her name, Layla Carter. She wasn't just a woman anymore, she was a symbol. And as the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the city, Layla knew that this was just the beginning.